Hey everyone, Derek and Jason here. We're really excited to announce the launch of a brand new podcast on the TMZ Audio Network called Big Down Under. It's hosted by our resident Aussie, Charlie Cotton, and he interviews the biggest celebrities and influencers from Australia and introduces them to the American market. He's got some great interviews with guys like Curtis Stone, Eliza Taylor, and a host of new people that you maybe heard a little bit
Hugh
about.
Jackman yet?
Not Hugh yet, but he's got Hugh's best friend.
Oh, perfect.
He does have a connection to Hugh Jackman. So give it a listen. It's called Big Down Under, and it's on the TMZ Audio Network. And with that said, let's get into our latest episode of Last Days, where we cover one of the brightest young Hollywood stars of the 1980s, Corey Haim.
Les, you know how you said when you got your license you wanted a BMW? Well, here you go. It's all yours. Take good care of it.
Thanks, Dad. It's very generous of you, but I don't need the BMW anymore.
Les!
I already have a Mercedes. Don't wait up, guys!
On March 9th, 2010, Corey Haim, the former teen heartthrob who rose to fame in the 80s with films like The Lost Boys, Lucas, and License to Drive, went to a local Los Angeles pharmacy to pick up some meds. The actor, accompanied by his mother, had spent much of his adult life battling addiction, and he appeared frail and exhausted due to a recent bout of pneumonia. The photos of this last outing paint a picture of a man who was once one of Hollywood's brightest young stars, but had spent the better part of the last 2 decades attempting to reclaim the magic of his earlier career, while simultaneously struggling to outrun his well-documented personal demons. Haim's rise to fame was meteoric. With his boyish charm, infectious energy, and natural charisma, he became one of the biggest teen idols of the 1980s, often appearing alongside his best friend and frequent co-star Corey Feldman. Together, they were the Two Coreys, a pop culture phenomenon that sold out theaters, packed fan conventions, and even led to their own reality show in the 2000s. But behind the glossy magazine covers was a darker reality, one of industry exploitation, substance abuse, and the crushing weight of former child stardom. By the time the 90s rolled around, the industry that had built Haim up into a massive star who graced countless magazine covers and commanded hefty paychecks for his movies had largely abandoned him. His struggle with addiction, which he later admitted began when he was just 15 years old while filming The Lost Boys, spiraled out of control as he bounced between direct-to-video projects and rehab stints. In the early 2000s, Haim's drug use reached a breaking point. He suffered a series of overdoses, one of which left him in a coma for a period of time. In a 2004 interview, he revealed he had been taking up to 85 pills a day at his lowest point, including a dangerous cocktail of Valium, Vicodin, and Soma. His attempts at sobriety were short-lived, often undone by the same pressures that had fueled his addiction in the first place, Hollywood's relentless pursuit of youth and relevance. Rather than rally around one of their own, the Hollywood entertainment machine turned him into a pathetic laughingstock, an object of derision on late-night shows, rather than someone who needed a helpful hand to get back on his feet. Still, in 2007, Haim and Feldman made their most concerted attempt to reclaim their former glory with a reality show called The Two Coreys, which chronicled their personal and professional struggles, but also tapped into the remaining reservoir of goodwill from their now middle-aged fans. What was initially pitched as a lighthearted look at their friendship, however, quickly turned into a sobering portrait of Haim's ongoing substance abuse. By the second season, things had unraveled so badly that production had to be shut down. Even Feldman, who had long tried to help his friend get clean, cut ties with Haim, calling him, quote, a lost cause at the time. And so, by the time of his final days in March 2010, Haim was living with his mother in a modest apartment in Burbank, trying to get his life back on track. He continued to work in low-budget film production, still hopeful for a comeback, but Haim's health was clearly failing, and whispers of continued drug use followed him wherever he went. And just hours after he'd been spotted at that pharmacy, Corey Haim collapsed in the home he shared with his mother, who made a distressed 911 call.
He's not breathing.
Ma'am, are you with him right now?
Yes.
How old is he?
He's 38 years old. I don't know what's going on. He had a fever this morning and cold.
Okay, ma'am, listen, he's still awake right now.
No.
But it was too late. Corey Haim was just 38 years old. I'm Derek Kaufman.
I'm Jason Beckerman.
And this is Last Days, Corey Haim.
In the aftermath of Corey Haim's sudden death on March 10, 2010, authorities quickly launched an investigation to determine the exact cause. Given his long history of substance abuse, speculation immediately swirled that an overdose had been the culprit. The speculation rankled some of those closest to Haim, especially in light of the fact that many people in his life reported that he was in a positive place and relatively clear-headed in the months leading up to his death, especially as he supported his mother through a cancer diagnosis. Corey Feldman, who was contacted by countless news outlets when the story of Haim's death broke, scolded the media for turning the death of his friend into what Feldman believed were reckless assumptions stemming from his history of substance abuse.
In the end, for the last year since his mom got sick, I never once have seen him in that condition. Every time I've talked to him, he's been clear, he's been concise, he's been together. Now, I'm not going to say that there aren't drugs involved, and when this all comes out, we'll understand exactly what happened. I believe that his death was accidental or otherwise, but I don't believe it was by his own hand. I don't believe it was his own doing, and I don't believe it was his intentions. I don't think this was a suicide, and I don't think it was an intentional overdose.
This is just one clip, but Feldman went on a media campaign in defense of his friend and consistently called for patience with the death investigation, trying to refocus attention on the tragedy instead of the scandal-mongering. And Corey Feldman was right, at least in part. The initial autopsy found no lethal levels of drugs in his system. Instead, the LA County Coroner's Office determined that Haim had died of pneumonia complicated by an enlarged heart and pulmonary congestion. To be fair, investigators also discovered that Haim had been obtaining a large number of prescription medications in the months leading up to his death. The California Attorney General's office even linked his name to an illegal prescription drug ring, though it was later determined that he had not personally obtained the drugs through fraudulent means.
I remember the discovery that he died of pneumonia being a shock, right? Because the immediate thought when Corey Haim died was this kid died of a drug overdose. The Two Coreys was a pretty big reality show. It documented his drug use, how it fractured his friendship with Corey Feldman and so forth. And when someone dies at 38, the assumption when they have that background is that they did die of a drug overdose. You look at Matthew Perry, it turned out to be ketamine. A lot of times that's just what it ends up being, but not the case with Corey Haim, although his body was ravaged at that point.
Look, I get it. Corey Feldman was defending sort of the legacy of his friend, and others had criticized the media for jumping to conclusions, but those conclusions were not based in nothing, right? Corey Haim had struggled for, and it really came into focus with the reality show, but we had known for decades that this kid struggled with drug abuse. And so it's a little unfair to be too harsh with the reaction, with the assumptions that were made that it must relate to drug use. And in fact, it did, right?
Yeah, he's 38 years old. He did have an enlarged heart.
Healthy 38-year-olds very infrequently die of pneumonia in the first world. It just doesn't happen, right? This is something that befalls much older people unless their body is weakened. And his was by years of intoxication of drug use. And so, look, I
think that's right. It's not total vindication.
Right. I get it. And it's sad. And I understand this point. But at the same time, let's be kind of honest with it. His body was undermined by the drug use.
He wasn't in good shape. The news of Haim's passing sent shockwaves through Hollywood, particularly among fellow 1980s stars who had grown up alongside him. His longtime friend and co-star Corey Feldman, as we mentioned, was one of the first to speak out, expressing his devastation and frustration with the industry for failing to support Haim during his darkest moments.
He's always made an attempt to come back. Always. He's always kept trying. He's always kept working. He's always kept fighting. And then he'd give up completely. And he'd be suicidal. I mean, he made so many attempts at suicide. He's OD'd so many times. I mean, there's been so many times where we all thought that was it.
Feldman, who had distanced himself from Haim when their reality show ended, tearfully described him as a, quote, fragile soul, and called his death an example of how Hollywood discards former child stars once they are no longer profitable. And other 80s icons, including Alyssa Milano, who had briefly dated Haim, and actors like Will Wheaton and Todd Bridges, publicly mourned his passing, with many reflecting on the struggles of young fame and the pressures that come along with it. Despite his career struggles in the years before his death, Haim remained beloved by fans, and his funeral, less than a week after his passing, on March 16th, was an intimate yet emotional gathering. Held at the Steeles Memorial Chapel in his hometown of Toronto, Canada, the private service was attended by close friends and family, including his mother, Judy Haim, who had been by his side in his final moments. Corey Feldman, citing a lack of financial means to travel to Canada at the time, did not attend but released a statement saying he would mourn his best friend in his own way. Instead of a lavish Hollywood farewell, the ceremony was simple, with Haim's casket covered in flowers and fans leaving heartfelt tributes at the site.
Adding to the tragedy, Haim's mother struggled with the financial burden of his burial. In a heartbreaking revelation, it was reported that she could not afford the funeral expenses, prompting speculation that celebrities might step in to help. Initially, there were rumors that the funeral would be paid for by the city of Toronto or various Hollywood figures, but it was later revealed that a memorabilia company, Startifax, had quietly covered the costs. The situation further highlighted the stark reality of Haim's later years. Once a multi-million-dollar star, he had died nearly penniless, with only a few loyal supporters ensuring he received a proper farewell. In the years since his passing, Corey Haim's legacy has remained a cautionary tale about the darker side of child stardom. Documentaries and interviews have continued to examine the exploitation he faced in Hollywood, and Corey Feldman has continued to be one of the loudest voices advocating for better protection of young actors. His mother, Judy Haim, has worked to preserve her son's memory, insisting that they had been on the path to recovery before his sudden passing. Let's take a quick break. More on Corey Haim's legacy when we come back.
Though his life was marked by struggles, Corey Haim is still remembered for the joy he brought to audiences during his peak. His boyish charm, infectious energy, and undeniable talent making him an unforgettable figure of 80s pop culture. But unlike the slow burn of steadily rising through the industry that helps some child stars adjust to the sudden and disorienting onslaught of fame, think of someone like Leonardo DiCaprio, who toiled away on smaller films and supporting role in Growing Pains before he catapulted into superstardom with Titanic, Haim's career began with a rapid ascent that made him one of the most recognizable teen stars of the era, and may have helped set the stage for his ultimate fall from grace. Born in Toronto, Canada in 1971, Haim initially had aspirations of becoming a hockey player, but quickly found his way into acting through commercials and Canadian television productions. His breakout role came at just 15 years old as the kid in the 1986 film Lucas, where he played a shy, awkward teenager who falls for a cheerleader. The film, which also starred Charlie Sheen and Winona Ryder, showcased Haim's natural charisma and vulnerability, earning him critical praise.
If you're so depressed, how come you're eating pizza?
Maybe I should just go home, eh?
No. Go eat pizza. Don't let me spoil your depression.
But it was The Lost Boys, just a year later in 1987, that cemented his status as a Hollywood heartthrob. Starring alongside Corey Feldman, Haim played the wide-eyed younger brother in a vampire-infested California town, a role that would define his career and lead to the iconic Two Coreys partnership. Throughout the late 1980s, Haim continued to dominate the teen film market with a string of hits, including License to Drive in 1988 and Dream a Little Dream in 1989. His boyish charm, easygoing demeanor, and relatable performances made him a fan favorite, gracing the covers of teen magazines like Tiger Beat and Bop on a regular basis. The chemistry between Haim and Feldman proved to be a winning formula, and the two became inseparable, both on screen and off.
Jason, let me ask you a question. How big? You're the right age bracket for Corey Haim fandom. They came of age around the same time you were their age.
Yeah.
And what did that seem like? Was that Lost Boys? I remember being a phenomenon, but I was a little younger for it, so it was a scary movie to me.
Look, I want to be as honest about this. They were always viewed with a little bit of a jaundiced eye. I mean, they were very famous, incredibly famous, right? They were the two Coreys were ubiquitous, and everybody knew who they were. But they were always viewed as a little bit of a joke.
Lightweights.
Lightweights, not particularly good actors. Haim was the really good-looking one. Feldman was a little more unique-looking. But they played, especially License to Drive. I remember seeing that in theaters. Yeah. Like it's a really poor man's version of some of the more bawdy, raucous movies that you saw come out in the 90s, American Pie being it's sort of like that, but not nearly as good. They were always viewed as a little bit of the joke a little bit.
I think you're right. Look, they were
in on the joke.
They were
too, by
teen
the way.
idols.
Yes.
This was also the time of Michael J. Fox and movies like Back to the Future, and that was a level removed. Those were seen as good films. He was seen as a much brighter star. This, I don't want to say B level because these movies made a lot of money.
Yes.
Lost Boys.
Lost Boys was huge,
but they were seen as second tier. But Corey Haim's fame, I think, was up there with the guys like Michael J. Fox.
So actually, Derek, I did a little bit of digging. I haven't prepped you for this. I did a little bit of digging about the most famous male duos in movie history.
Love this.
And sort of put it out there with like who's done the most movies. You have a couple of the real old school guys. Abbott and Costello did dozens and dozens of movies. Laurel and Hardy did something like 100. But in the last 60 or 70 years, the Haim-Feldman tandem, that duo, is right up the top. Any idea what film duo, all comedic,
Yeah.
has the most movies they've done together last, let's call it 50 years?
I mean, I would say, I'm not sure if it's too old for this game, but Hope and Crosby did a bunch. Those Road to Morocco movies. Too old for the game.
Too old for this.
Younger comedic tandems. I don't know. Ben Affleck and Matt Damon.
Ben Affleck and Damon have a total of 9 movies together.
Yeah.
Not at the top, though.
Who was number
We
one?
have Stiller and Owen Wilson, done
Oh, that's
11. They have all
great.
the Meet the Fockers movies.
Yes.
They had the Night at the Museum, Zoolander movies they all did together. I will say that Stiller was the lead in all those movies, and Owen Wilson was secondary. The partnership like that, you have Pitt and Clooney have 7 movies together.
They're good.
Key and Peele have 3. Affleck and Damon have 9. Corey and Corey, 9 movies together.
Wow, they're
the
up there with
same
Ben
level as
Affleck.
Affleck and Damon.
That's pretty good. That's
In
pretty
this
good. And it
One
gives you a
metric
sense.
and one metric only. They're the same
The only
level
metric that matters for this game.
of Affleck and Damon. So as Haim's fame skyrocketed, so did the pressures of Hollywood. By the time he was 15, he had already been introduced to drugs on film sets, a decision that would lead to a lifelong struggle with addiction. While he remained a staple of teen entertainment, his personal battles began to overshadow his career. As the 1990s arrived, Haim felt it increasingly difficult to transition into adult roles. Unlike other teen stars who managed to reinvent themselves, Haim's efforts to mature as an actor were met with resistance from an industry that had already begun to move on. His boyish looks, once his greatest asset, became a hindrance as he aged out of teen heartthrob roles. Studios and casting agents were reluctant to take a chance on him, especially as his off-screen behavior became more erratic. His substance abuse issues, which had begun during his rise to fame, worsened as the roles dried up. Instead of major studio projects, Haim was relegated to low-budget films, many of which went straight to video.
And by the mid-90s, Haim's career had entered a downward spiral. He attempted multiple comebacks, including appearing in self-produced films and reality television, but each attempt was short-lived. Drug use became a well-documented struggle with multiple rehab stints and public admissions of his addiction. In 1997, he filed for bankruptcy, listing debts to medical providers and the IRS, further cementing his fall from grace. Despite these setbacks, Haim never gave up on his dream of reclaiming his former glory. He continued acting in small projects, and by the early 2000s, he even appeared to be making progress towards sobriety. However, his reputation made it difficult for him to secure meaningful roles, leaving him in this cycle of failed comebacks. Despite his struggles, Haim remained a beloved figure among fans and fellow actors who remembered him as the charming, talented young star he once was. His partnership with Corey Feldman was even briefly revived in this reality series we discussed called The Two Coreys in 2007, which documented their friendship and their struggles.
You know what? I don't need to be here. I can leave.
You guys.
No, this is your
guys.
problem, not you guys. This is your problem. But I mean, your wife, man, like being in the middle.
Dude, we just had a good meeting.
Right.
Everything's fine. What's
Dude,
the
great
problem?
guy, great meeting. I don't give a about that. I give a about this. Family, you understand that?
He's telling me about what's going on, and that you may need to be around for a long time. And I'm going, no.
He can't stay.
You.
What am I, a germ?
I don't need your attitude.
Okay, so you're his wife. You could talk to me. I don't think so.
I don't need your attitude.
Susie,
Dude, you guys gotta calm down.
Your wife on a leash, man. She's pissing me off now.
Dude,
Yeah,
that's
what?
my wife.
Yeah, so what, you back her up all the time?
Jason, I remember the show. It was initially intended as this is going to be a nostalgic look. They had very high hopes that this was going to reintroduce the two Coreys to the world in a very positive light because they do have a certain chemistry. Feldman is a little bit of a sort of mischievous, and his friend was always sort of the handsome one, kind of a wingman kind of dynamic that they had. But the show quickly turned very negative. And I remember it was at the height of reality television.
It's all pretty sad. I never actually saw it. The whole thing made me sad. I mean, they were, to the point you made earlier, they're hugely famous when I was coming up, and I knew who they were when I was a kid. But by that point, they'd become really sad. And the show itself, all the press that came out from that was like, this is a really negative piece of art they're trying to create.
And it was one of those, I remember that this was around the time of the end of the Nicole Smith show too. Yeah. There's a delusion that they're tapping into because the two Coreys actually still think they're relevant, but you can imagine the reality show producers knowing exactly what they want, which is to watch the drain, watch these two guys spiral out of control, sort of frame them as pathetic. There was an awareness sometimes in some of the moments in the clip that we just played where Haim seems to be just unaware of how he looks. He's just sort of spiraling out of control, and Feldman trying to calm him down. We now think of Corey Feldman, who's a guy we still sort of cover as really out there. He's in
Yeah.
a rock band.
But he was the stable one.
But he's the stable one in
Right.
the show. So it's a very sort of strange role reversal. And by the second season, it became clear that Haim was just deeply struggling, and Feldman ultimately severed ties, saying he could no longer enable Haim's behavior. The show was canceled, and Haim found himself once again at a crossroads, still chasing that comeback that never came.
In death, Corey Haim's legacy has become a cautionary tale of the darker side of Hollywood, particularly the exploitation and neglect of child stars. His story is often referenced in discussions about the dangers of early fame and the lack of support systems for young actors. Corey Feldman has continued to speak out about the alleged abuses they faced as child stars and the failure of Hollywood to protect its most vulnerable performers. While Haim's later years were filled with struggles, his fans and supporters continue to celebrate his contributions to 1980s pop culture. His films remain beloved by audiences who grew up watching him, and for many, Corey Haim will always be remembered as the bright, talented, and endlessly charismatic young actor who, for a brief moment, ruled Hollywood.
Corey Haim's life was truly a heartbreaking mix of immense talent, fleeting superstardom, and personal demons that he was never quite able to overcome. His journey from a bright-eyed teen idol to a struggling adult actor serves as a stark reminder of how Hollywood often discards its young stars once they're no longer profitable. Yet despite these hardships, Haim's legacy endures, not just through the films that continue to capture the hearts of fans, but in the lasting impact of his story on the industry's conversation around child stars and addiction. The center of that legacy is his lifelong friendship with Corey Feldman, a bond that, despite its ups and downs, remained one of the most significant relationships of his life. In reflecting on their years together, Feldman once said, quote, "He was my brother. He was my best friend. Nobody will ever understand the connection we had, but I loved him with all my heart." And while Corey Haim's life was filled with struggles, his friendship with Feldman, that bond forged in the fires of fame and hardship, remains one of the most enduring parts of his legacy. And even though the story of Corey Haim's brief life is filled with tragedy and sadness, it wasn't always. And that often gets lost when people talk about the two Coreys, who were once carefree and full of hope, promise, and potential. And so I thought it only fitting to bring back a bit of that levity and charisma that launched these two young men into the stratosphere of Hollywood for a brief time. Heard here, relishing in their collaboration on License to Drive.
Corey Feldman and I work really good together. It's our second film. And he's very cool. I mean, he's my best friend.
We're in almost every scene together, and when you know somebody that well and you're friends with them, it's so easy to work because you're so used to each other. So it's like you hang out in your trailers and then you come right to the set.